Story 1. The process is taught in leadership classes in many reserve officers training corps units. It boils down to making your disagreement with the legality or ethics of the order known to your superiors. They either accept it or reject it. At that point, you decide whether to follow through or not. The key and final step is to be willing to accept the consequences of your actions. Just because you received an illegal order and refuse to carry it out does not mean it is a get-out-of-jail-free loophole, either metaphorically or literally in rare cases. Often, it is simply the end of your career, and a service member must be prepared to accept that. The example you set by doing so matters to those both below and above you. Story 2. Active duty here. We are obligated to follow all lawful orders. Fortunately, these situations are rarely snap-second events. When an order comes down, we start planning and organizing the operation. If a legal question arises, we contact legal advisors, usually more than one judge advocate general, to understand the situation. Based on their input, we build our plan and train our personnel so they can execute the mission. Edit. This received a lot of attention. First, to those messaging me or sending threats, please remain calm. We can have a productive and civil conversation about this, but it cannot start or end with threats. In the interest of responding to a broad spectrum of comments, here are some general responses. No, we are not excited to shoot protesters. Yes, we have the ability to refuse orders we believe may not be legal. If we do, we accept the consequences. No, if the government suddenly declared we had to execute everyone who is right-handed, we as a whole would not comply. The United States Constitution and laws are not the only rules we are held accountable to. The Geneva Conventions, treaties, and several other agreements make that impossible. No, I am not a supporter of what Immigration and Customs Enforcement is doing. I personally feel they are aggravating a sensitive situation. Story 3. Officer here, recently moved from active duty to reserves. The hardest part of the job is knowing when to say no. I got good at it but did not enjoy it. It is hard because it carries heavy consequences if you are wrong. A much more concerning thought is about the absence of orders. Commanders are responsible for any orders they give officially, but many communicate in hints. A significant number of commanders are very timid in their decision-making, so any gray area will be covered by hints. An example. The Abu Ghraib incident saw soldiers commit acts of torture when their only official orders were to soften detainees up for interrogation. They defended their actions by citing the hints given in the absence of additional orders. Subordinate officers have their career progression dependent on their immediate superiors, so these hints are normalized in day-to-day ingratiation rituals. When day-to-day becomes an active deployment in a combat zone, those rituals persist and ingratiation takes the form of criminal conspiracy much more often than many realize. Story 4. It is not about whether a soldier subjectively believes that an order is unlawful. It has to be, in fact, unlawful. The soldier bears the risk of insubordination if they refuse to comply with an order that they subjectively believe to be unlawful but in fact turns out to be lawful. Moreover, the generic unlawfulness of the mission, the overall goals of the campaign, or disagreement with the approach used to achieve those goals is not enough. It is about whether the specific assignment and the specific orders given to the soldier are themselves unlawful. Story 5. If you are going to disobey a direct order, you better be sure it is illegal, or you will suffer the consequences. It is just part of the job. Story 6. I will present a scenario. A low-ranking military personnel receives an order from the chain of command. The order is simple. Gear up, deploy to the scene, stand at the end of the street, and do not allow any civilian to pass the barricade line. Anyone in the military would follow this order because it is lawful and reasonable. But if we expand the scenario, problems arise. After being stationed at the barricade, a protester approaches and tries to pass. The soldier was told two things. Stand at the barricade and do not let anyone pass. The soldier says, "Hey, you cannot pass." The protester ignores this and attempts to pass anyway. The soldier tries to block the protester with his body. The protester then tries to forcefully pass the soldier. At this point, a physical altercation occurs between the two. Who is right? the soldier following lawful orders or the protester exercising their rights. It is a gray area, and in the moment, there is no clear right side. Let us continue. The soldier, physically fit and fully equipped, is stronger than the protester. During the altercation, he shoves the protester away. This is where chaos can begin. 3 outcomes are possible. 1. The protester gets up unharmed and leaves. The protester is slightly harmed, retaliates, and incites nearby protesters, causing the situation to escalate but remains somewhat controlled. The protester falls, is severely injured or worse, hits their head and dies, instantly inciting an uncontrollable riot. The soldier was following lawful orders, yet the situation can escalate dramatically. As an observer, where do you draw the line? Story 7, veteran here, served 5 years active duty as an officer. If this is a reference to the current situation in Los Angeles, it is not even close to the line. The National Guard has often been called up to assist law enforcement in stopping civil unrest. Former President Donald Trump is being inappropriate, but this is well within the boundaries of the law. Orders to fire on unarmed civilians would not be obeyed. Orders to arrest civilians would not be obeyed unless the president had suspended the Posse Comitatus Act, and I had been in a briefing where the Judge Advocate General had explicitly told us that it was allowed. Orders to put on battle gear, drive a mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicle to downtown Los Angeles, and stand around looking intimidating for a couple of days would be followed, but only after clear and explicit instructions from the Judge Advocate General on rules of engagement. Story 8. As a veteran, I will say you are allowed and expected to deny orders that are unlawful or immoral. What is going on in California is technically legal, but just because you do not agree with something politically, especially as a soldier, does not mean it crosses the boundary of immorality. Story 9. As a veteran, I would have never fired on United States citizens. End of story. Other than that, I carried out some questionable actions based on uncertain intelligence. Story 10. Active duty here. There are some lines that should not be crossed. Fire on protesters? No. Imprison and deport citizens? Not going to do it. Spy on citizens? No. I know not every service member agrees with me, but I am not going to do things just because I am told to. Whenever I am given an ambiguous order, either morally or just in its vagueness, I ask what the end goal is. I want the higher-ups to articulate it. Spell it out. Force them to listen to their own words. Then again, I have never been put into this kind of spot. It has been rare that I have met an officer in my field who could not discern between right and wrong. Even rarer for those who deliberately choose to do wrong. I think and hope it will not come down to these types of decisions at my level. Story 11. A soldier may disobey an order when it is unlawful, such as violating the Constitution or laws of the United States, or when it would cause harm or lead to mission failure. Generally, orders are presumed lawful, and disobedience is a serious offense. But there are exceptions for unlawful or harmful orders. Story 12. The Trump administration is going to publicly overpunish the first service member who speaks out or disobeys an order, and the rest will fall in line. Story 13. You follow orders. Reddit is going to get some dumb E3 kicked out of the military because they have it in their heads that deploying to Los Angeles is an unlawful order. Story 14. Posse Comitatus Act. The Posse Comitatus Act of 1878, a federal law, prohibits the use of federal military personnel for domestic law enforcement unless specifically authorized by the Constitution or Congress. Story 15. I have not seen this aspect posted yet, so it may be something missed by the general population. The officer and enlisted oaths of office are written differently in an intentional manner. Enlisted members swear to obey the orders of the President of the United States and the orders of the officers appointed over them. Officers swear to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and to faithfully discharge the duties of their office. Officers do not swear to obey those above them and should feel they have the agency to make decisions about how to best do their job. That does not mean disobeying orders has no consequences, but it does mean they are meant to have the power to do so. This should operate as another level of failsafe for orders they disagree with. I encourage anyone to research this and disagree with me, For context, I separated as an active duty submarine officer a few years ago. Story 16. I served in the Army for about 6 years. You have to assume orders are lawful unless it is blatantly not, such as someone ordering you to harm a random United States citizen. This question relates to the current National Guard issue in California. It is helpful to read about the Insurrection Act. The federal government is within its rights to use the National Guard to aid in enforcing federal law. The 1807 Act has been modified twice. In 1861, a new section was added allowing the federal government to use the National Guard and armed forces against the will of the state government in cases of rebellion against the authority of the government of the United States. This means that despite California law or Los Angeles local ordinances, this is a lawful use of the National Guard. Story 17. Multiple generals with 3 or more stars would need to refuse the orders. Unfortunately, I know from experience that a large percentage of generals are in fact cowards and politicians. Story 18. It is interesting to see people only talk about the legality of an order and not the actual question, which is about orders that harm civilians of your own country. Those are two completely different things. Story 19. Retired military. We follow all lawful orders. However, we have strict rules of engagement. As a senior leader responsible for teaching and enforcing rules of engagement, I would say the military is held to a much higher standard than law enforcement officers via the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Story 20. Hi. This is not how anything works, including human nature. I served for over 15 years in the Canadian Armed Forces. The amount of corruption, incompetence, and outright fraud in the military system makes your question invalid. I will provide you with 2 examples and one about human nature. 1. Early in my career, I was put on a driver course. During the course, one of the more senior members was doing donuts in the training area, rolled and totaled the vehicle. Nearly every single member pushed the vehicle into an obstacle ditch to make it look like it rolled there when the military police showed up to make a report. Nobody said a thing. I am a bit unclear on the details and the actual laws, but this point still stands. I did not see this myself, but I was told directly by members who returned from overseas. They were in a gunfight, they won. They had to bring the enemy combatants' dead bodies back. But they did not want to put the bodies in the back of their vehicle with the troops to avoid blood and proximity to those who fought. So, they tied the bodies to the top/front of their vehicle and drove back, much to the dismay of the military medics who condemned them. Chase Hughes has a notable video on how far someone can be pushed by orders. In reality, I believe every single person who was prompted pushed a button to shock and torture someone because they were told to. I simplified this significantly. So where does that leave us? Brother, you eat tortured animals and buy electronics built and farmed by slaves for your leisure. Even knowing this, you will not look for alternatives. Most people will do as they are told. Only people with high agency and intelligence can go against the grain. Who do you think joins the military and why? Almost every member has stories like these, and they are endless. This is without mentioning the easy low-hanging fruit of all the actual war crimes in the past. Your question comes from a false Hollywood zeitgeist of what a good person would do as seen in families on TV, not how things actually work. Do you help someone because it is convenient and they are close? Were there people around to tell you that you were a good person? How far away does someone in trouble need to be before you stop caring and acting? Tough stuff. Normalcy bias, herd mentality, and cognitive dissonance govern it all. Story 21, veteran here. In my opinion, as long as the order is legal, it should be followed. If you pick and choose when to follow orders based on morals, then you should not be a soldier. Story 22. It was the Ohio National Guard that fired upon and killed students at Kent State University. There were no consequences. Story 23. 99.9% of the military personnel claiming they will not follow any order they are given are completely dishonest. Story 24. They took an oath to defend us against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and to uphold the Constitution. Story 25. If the Army cannot suppress a protest at a Home Depot, then I will send in the Marines, is some genius-level transactional leadership from Kegseth. Story 26. The National Guard is most likely to be called up, but rarely engages directly with civilians during civilian unrest. They mostly serve as backup to the police or guard critical infrastructure. It seems many people are overdramatic, uninformed, or overestimate the use of the military in response. Story 27. When I was in the 7th Infantry Division Light, it seemed my unit might be sent to Los Angeles for the riots. The 3rd Brigade was sent instead. We were in the 2nd Brigade. My take, publicly expressed and not disagreed with, was that I would not shoot any Americans unless they shot at me first. I think most soldiers share this mindset. Note that soldiers are not riot police. Do not throw rocks or other objects at them. They will shoot you. Rock throwing is not free speech. And if a court later decides they were wrong to shoot you, you are still dead. See Kent State. Story 28. Most military personnel will see you as a combatant if you attack them or those they are protecting. Whether you use guns, rocks, or knives, they would fire on you to protect themselves and others, and they would be justified. Story 29. In this situation, you need to de-escalate emotions and look at what is happening. Federal agents are lawfully executing their job. Citizens did not like it. Citizens crossed the line into violence. Federal officers went through the appropriate channels to seek help from local law enforcement. Elected officials did not provide help and even encouraged more violence. If a local elected leader publicly supports violence against the federal government, then there will be a response. It is strange that this is hard to understand. During dark times in both New York and Chicago, when organized crime controlled the police department and elected officials, federal help was brought in to prosecute wrongdoers. What recourse do law-abiding citizens have when those in power locally practice violence and do not defend the citizens? That is when the federal government steps in. It is a necessary check against local corruption. Story 30. Donald Trump and his administration have no respect for the armed forces. Your oath was to uphold the Constitution. Do so. Story 31. We swore an oath to defend the United States Constitution from all enemies, both foreign and domestic. An oath which does not expire. When people issue orders that run contrary to the Constitution, we have an obligation to challenge and, if illegal, disobey those orders. If you are looting after a disaster, you are a target. If you are not where you are supposed to be, you are a target. If you threaten my team or me, you are a target. Common sense needs to prevail. Story 32. Criminals terrorizing the streets and attacking police and state officers doing their jobs will always be the target for troops. Story 33. Have you taken a look at the military subreddits? If you are not sure where they are, start with r/military and then maybe Army, Marines, and Veteran. Story 34. What would Smedley Butler do? He saved America in 1933 from a coup by the same forces behind this one. I hope the United States Marine Corps will keep their honor clean and protect the people, regardless of the Constitution. Story 35. Illegal immigrants are not citizens of our country. I do not think you understand your question. Story 36. United States Marine Corps veteran here. We took an oath to uphold the Constitution, to obey lawful orders, and to protect the country from terrorists, domestic or foreign. I did and still would uphold that oath. I would also do whatever I could to protect citizens. But the second anyone came at me with violent intent, I would end the threat to myself and my brothers without hesitation. Protesting is not and will not be a problem. It is protected by the Constitution, and whether or not I agree with the protest does not matter. It is your right and my duty to uphold your right. The vast majority of service members would do the same. But these borderline riots are going to get people killed. The second someone starts throwing rocks or Molotov cocktails or anything more serious at National Guardsmen, it is going to end in death. They typically have their rules of engagement much more restraining than the Marines would. Just food for thought. Story 37. Not military, but if I saw someone burning the United States flag while waving the Mexican flag in the United States, I would hope they get arrested. Story 38. There are some very interesting studies on this. The summary is that regardless of what soldiers might say in this thread, 99% of the time they will follow orders. Edit. Since I have seen some downvotes, see the Milgram study. Story 39. Most of the actual fighting troops are young men who you probably looked down on in high school. Their only concern is when they get their next beer and where they can find someone to connect with. Now you want them to fight and die in a revolutionary war because Donald Trump is inappropriate on social media, and almost nothing has changed from a foreign or domestic policy perspective. You wonder why joining the military almost always pushes people to the right. Your disdain and attitude toward disposable lives is what causes this. 7-year Marine Sergeant. Story 40. Long history of following orders. Unionists, those they shoot. Leftists, those they shoot. Retired military, those they shoot. Story 41. The Geneva Conventions outline everything a soldier needs to know about lawful and unlawful orders. Soldiers are required to know the provisions of the conventions. Story 42. Laughing out loud. There are many uniform code of military justice scholars here. Most active duty soldiers are not even qualified to answer the legal question. Laws are interpreted by those with the most money. However, every soldier has a moral obligation to their fellow citizens. This is the real question to ask. What would you really do when faced with this situation? Story 43. Or more to the point, where do you draw the line between orders and the oath you took to the Constitution? Story 44. Every member of the military, past and present, took an oath to defend the Constitution. So where are you? Story 45. Veteran here. Jail, seriously. The United States military must comply with their orders, regardless of whether they are lawful or not. If an order is unlawful and the person who gave the order is found at fault, the service member following the order is still held responsible and sent to military jail. If the service member does not comply immediately, they are also sent to military jail. They take the fall no matter what. Do not join. It is a mess. Story 46. I do not care what there is for posturing here. If he says it, the military will do it. People will argue after the fact, but the deed will be done. Just following orders will, once again, be tried as an excuse. Story 47. I expect that if shot at, soldiers will shoot back. The same applies if they are attacked with rocks, bottles, Molotov cocktails, bats, or similar objects. It is hard to imagine that they would be sent there without rules of engagement that allow them to protect themselves. The real issue is the events, orders, and decisions that come before the violence, and those matters almost certainly will not involve the soldiers. Donald Trump wants there to be a violent confrontation. He wants a situation in which American soldiers are forced to harm civilians. The question should not be whether soldiers will pull triggers. It should be whether anything can be done to stop him from engineering a situation where violence is unavoidable. My guess is that the situation is already too far gone for that, but time will tell. Story 48. Are we talking about people in the country legally or people who broke the law to get in and have no right to be here? Story 49. Veteran here. I would go hide in the bathroom or somewhere. If it is something I do not believe in, I will evade it as much as I can. I am my own person. They can go to hell. I do not care. Story 50. Soldiers are not going to be friends. The higher authorities will say it is legal, and they will shoot those they are told to. The military is a tool of the government. It does not exist to help the people. Story 51. The people of your own country. What happens when these individuals throw rocks, explosive devices, and point guns at you? Story 52. Legality is irrelevant. The problem is that the citizens with access to the means of change, such as the military, are not proactive in their duty. Not killing innocents is very different from stopping the known and clear threats from the administration itself. Story 53. I have never been in the military, but I was a career law enforcement officer. In my opinion, this is an unfair question because it asks people to make one of the most consequential decisions of their lives in the abstract, without the full story, at a time and place that will be different for most. When people ask this question, they often have a specific scenario in mind that is not stated. The respondent may have an entirely different unspoken scenario in mind. I doubt there are many who are not currently questioning themselves about what they will do if faced with a difficult situation. However, they cannot tell you because while you are curious about it, they need to try and decide. This is a completely different matter. Story 54. If the order includes Microsoft PowerPoint and it is after 5 p.m., that is a Geneva Convention violation in my book. Story 55. I was not a combat military occupational specialty, but I was asked this question a while ago. I think whoever the enemy is, that is how they will be described, and I doubt they will give you any information to empathize with the enemy. Story 56. The Government Accountability Office employees need not respond since they are just private citizens committing war crimes on American soil at the behest of the Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Story 57. The military is like the police. Self-selected by people who want to be there, choose to be there, and are happy to do as they are told. Story 58. The young enlisted personnel on the front lines are going to do what they are told unless it is clearly illegal. It is not reasonable to expect them to understand state, federal, and constitutional legalities. If they end up in a military court, the jury will consist of officers and possibly one senior non-commissioned officer. The punishment could include imprisonment, dishonorable discharge, and loss of all pay and benefits. Receiving a field grade Article 15 is possible if the commanding officer wants to keep them in the unit, but it still involves losing pay, confinement, and extra duty. That is a significant risk to take. Story 59. The Posse Comitatus Act prohibits the use of federal troops to enforce civilian law except in cases authorized by the Constitution or by an act of Congress. This provision allowed the use of federal forces against the 1919 rioters in Chicago, the bonus marchers in Washington, D.C. in 1932, and the railroad workers who went on strike during President Truman's administration, who temporarily nationalized the railroads under the Army Corps of Engineers. More recent exceptions to the Posse Comitatus Act include the 1973 standoff between federal troops and the American Indian Movement at Wounded Knee, South Dakota, the 1992 street riots in Los Angeles after the Rodney King verdict, the 1993 standoff with the Branch Davidians at Waco, Texas, the bombing of the federal building in Oklahoma City, and the 2001 suicide attacks on the World Trade Center. Story 60. I have never served. Forgive me if my question sounds disrespectful. I have seen many people say that the rank and file swear an oath and will follow orders. What is the oath? What do they say? I assume it is a specific formal phrase. Is it different for different branches of the military? When you achieve a higher rank or move to the Navy SEAL Team, Special Forces, and others, are there additional oaths? Story 61. If a crowd of protesters sits down and starts chanting peacefully, where does your loyalty to the Constitution lie? Would you defend the protesters if they were attacked by law enforcement? Would you use force against peaceful protesters? I suppose that is the same question. Story 62. If I were in the National Guard or any branch of the service, I would really have to ask myself at what point orders that are morally wrong and cause innocent people to die render me unable to follow those orders. Is this why so many service members have post-traumatic stress disorder or other mental health issues? Story 63. Many responses say that the order needs to be lawful. However, this is a dangerous slope. To exaggerate, the orders for the prison guards at Auschwitz were all lawful. I realize this is extreme, but hiding behind an order being lawful is not enough. Does it also comply with human rights? That is a difficult question for an individual soldier or policeman to answer. Story 64. If you are asking if they are on your side against former President Donald Trump, the answer is unfortunately probably not. Even though many soldiers are horrified by what is going on and remind each other not to stand near the police or immigration and customs enforcement because they do not want to be associated. Ultimately, they will follow lawful orders. Many horrible actions are lawful. Story 65. There is no line in the moment. You are following all orders, or you are facing consequences. What people do not understand is that lawful orders do not mean morally correct orders. Story 66. I like looking at the number of upvotes on certain comments. It speaks volumes about how the majority of the readers of this question feel about the perspective. If this observation is not isolated to this forum and indicates an overall sentiment, then the midterm elections will be an interesting inflection point. More people seem to believe the use of the military on the civilian population is wrong. More people seem to see deportation without due process as wrong. If the number of upvotes can be translated to American sentiment and voting percentages, the administration is facing serious problems and needs to pivot to maintain its advantage. These are just statistical observations. Story 67. I am active duty and come from a military family, so this is something I have definitely discussed. We are trained to understand that it is our job to follow lawful orders, as I have seen others say. I have had training on morality and how and when to stop following orders if they cross lines. These situations tend to be rare, thankfully, but they do happen. For me, that moral line is clear. If I receive an order that feels questionable, I take time to think it through, which is helped by my free time spent studying philosophy. It is about considering consequences and asking the right questions. Why am I receiving this order? What happens if I obey? What happens if I do not? I do not usually focus on what backlash looks like either. There are serious consequences for me being low-ranking if I choose not to follow orders, but I have also seen people close to me avoid disaster by doing so. Story 68. There is no line when it comes to lawful orders. However, I suggest you review the two oaths, one for enlisted personnel and one for officers. Story 69. The military is a very complex system, and it is difficult to disobey orders without severe consequences. Military life, the politics involved, and its judicial system are on an entirely different level than that of the civilian world. Military personnel must separate their political views, regardless of their leanings, when it comes to the military structure, following orders, and performing their duties. Story 70. A message to all National Guard members sent to California. You must obey any order deemed lawful. If you receive an order to fire on American civilians, how accurate your aim is entirely under your control. Godspeed. Story 71. That is not as easy a question to answer as many may think, because not following a lawful order is a serious offense and could result in a long stint in the brig. However, the courts have ruled that just following orders is not a defense. If you are ordered to do something unlawful and do it, you can still end up in the brig. Often, there is a very gray line between a lawful order and an unlawful order. Clearly, if you are ordered to march into a town and start lining up and shooting civilians, that is an unlawful order. But what if you are ordered to bomb the same town into rubble because there is intelligence suggesting insurgents have a base there? Many innocent civilians will likely die, yet it may also be a valid military target. So, is that a lawful order or an unlawful order? Story 72, 2010 to 2022, E5, United States Army here. All lawful orders from the top will be obeyed. A few will straggle behind to execute command. Usually, if it is not the community they come from, war can be and will be waged. Honestly, martial law would not work in places like the Deep South, Detroit, Chicago, New York City, or small towns in Texas. Story 73. The United States military, or any military, is not a single-minded organism. All Donald Trump needs is enough personnel to follow his orders. He does not need all or even a majority, and he can enforce whatever he wants unless a sizable portion of the military actively prevents his orders from being enforced, at which point it would officially be a civil war. Story 74. Kind of related, but I have always wondered how military personnel feel about the head of state. This is a general question for any military personnel in the world. Do you think, oh no, when a leader known for extreme positions takes power? Or is it business as usual? Story 75. The military does not stop Israeli infiltration of the government. Do you think they do anything other than what politicians tell them? Story 76. Well, this is coming soon and will be asked again. Illegal orders, yes or no, or just obeying orders? Already ignored as a defense by the Geneva Convention. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.